Josh's turn to cook.
Right, welcome everyone to our weekly encrypted DNS call, which is now being recorded, as your device will hopefully tell you. What we're going to do today, primarily, and in fact, those of you that can see a screen on your device will get a very good clue as to what we're going to do today. As advertised, Chaoyi Lu will very shortly reprise his presentation that he gave at the IRTF open meeting at IETF 108 a few weeks back. As you may be aware, it's an award-winning paper that's the subject of this presentation. Well done in advance for getting that prize. I thought it would be pertinent to this call, given, as you'll see from the title slide, it was looking at end-to-end measurement of encrypted DNS. I thought it would be useful just to briefly sort of reprise the presentation and then give people that perhaps didn't have the opportunity to hear it firsthand during ITF 108, given that it was quite a crowded schedule through the week, to then ask questions, and we'll have a discussion in the usual way. So without further ado, I will ask Chaoyi Lu to enable your video if it's not already enabled, your camera that is, and over to you to take us through the presentation, and then, as I say, we'll go from presentation into questions immediately afterwards. So over to you. Thanks very much.
Hey, thanks, Andrew. Hello, everyone. I'm Chaoyi Lu from Tsinghua University, and thanks for having me here. So in this work, we present a large-scale measurement study on the operational status of encrypted DNS protocols, or what we call here DNS-over-Encryption. So the aim of this study is to give an early view into this ecosystem and answering some basic questions, including how many servers on the internet are now supporting these protocols, how are the reachability and performance of large public DNS services, and how are the protocols now leveraged by internet users. The original paper was published at the IMC conference, and the major results were obtained in 2019. But in today's talk, we will also present some more recent updates. So encrypted DNS protocols are one of the mainstream solutions to solving DNS privacy issues. So before we start, let's take a brief tour on what has been done so far. So starting from 2009, we see some early protocols from the industry like DNSCurve and DNSCrypt. From around 2014, DNS privacy problems have drawn attention from the IETF, and some informational documents were released. And since then, 3 IETF working groups have been involved to work on solutions. And as a result, several encrypted DNS protocols have been standardized, including the well-known DOT and DOE. And of course, there are still more solutions and implementations to come, like DNS-over-QUIC, using TLS for DNS zone transfers, and DNS server discovery. And these mechanisms are still under discussion. So in this work, we focus on measuring 2 standard and extensively supported protocols, DNS-over-TLS, or DOT, and DNS-over-HTTPS, or DOE. And currently, both protocols work between stub and recursive resolvers. So after the efforts from the community and the industry, we aim to understand the current ecosystem of encrypted DNS protocols from internet users' perspective. And more specifically, we seek answers to these questions. How many servers in the wild are now supporting encrypted DNS protocols? And how are they currently operated? How are the performances of large public DNS services? And are there any issues preventing global users from accessing them? And what does the real world usage of the protocols look like from internet traffic's perspective? So first up, How many servers are offering encrypted DNS services to the public? So discovering open dot resolvers is simple. It runs over a dedicated port, so an internet-wide scan will suffice. DOE servers, however, are a little bit different. They use URI templates and a shared port 443, so we cannot simply use port scans to discover them. But the RFC document and large providers have used some common URI templates, such as /DNS-query, which inspires us to look for them in large-scale URL datasets. So in more detail, to find open dot resolvers, we first launch internet-wide scans of port 853 using ZMAP. And for hosts with this port open, we send them dot queries using the getDNS API, and only those correctly answering our queries are counted as dot resolvers. And finally, we fetch and verify their certificate chains on port 853 with OpenSSL. And in this study, we only consider resolvers in the IPv4 address space. So during February the 1st and May the 1st, 2019, we repeated our scan every 10 days. But surprisingly, in every scan, we discovered 2 to 3 million hosts that have port 853 open, but only around 2,000 of them responded to our dot queries and are true dot resolvers. We further identified them by the subject of their certificates on port 853 and find several big players dominate in the count of servers. For example, Clean Browsing DNS alone accounts for over 1,000 resolver addresses in almost each of our scans. And big companies also offer dot on dozens of other addresses that are not advertised on their web pages. And apart from the large ones, we also find smaller providers with less addresses, which account for the long tail. The 2,000 dot resolvers we discover are maintained by around 200 providers, and 70% of them only operate on one IP address. And these services include personal servers, as well as public DNS services that are less known. And here are some more recent updates. In our latest scan on July the 1st, 2020, we find that there has been a significant increase in both the number of open dot resolvers and the count of their providers. Compared to a year ago, the number of open dot resolvers has risen to over 7.8 thousand, almost quadrupled. And from their certificates, the dot resolvers are now operated by 1,200 providers. And similarly, the several big players also maintain many of them. And this time, Cloudflare tops the list with nearly 2,000 resolver addresses, followed by Fortinet firewall devices, Clean Browsing, and nextdns.io. The dot usage profile suggests that under strict privacy, dot clients should validate the full path of resolver certificates. So we check all dot resolvers in our list with OpenSSL. And during our regular scans from February to July 2019, we find that around 25% of all dot providers have at least one resolver which use invalid certificates on port 853. And a year later, we find that TLS certificate management still poses as a problem. In our latest scan in this July, the ratio of open dot resolvers with invalid certificates rises to 28%, but they belong to a smaller portion of providers, less than 10%. We then take a look into the error codes that OpenSSL shows and find that the invalid certificates belong to 3 categories. Around 70% are self-signed certificates, and most of them are installed on firewalls and TLS inspection devices. An example here is FortiGate, a firewall of Fortinet. In our scan this July, we find over 1,500 such devices that are listening on port 853, and all of them uses the default self-signed certificates of this particular device. And another 15% of the invalid certificates are expired, and 1/3 of them have expired before 2020, that is more than half a year. So these servers could have already been out of maintenance. And the rest 15% has problems in the certificate chains which cannot be correctly validated. And because the authentication of DOT relies on the certificates, we suggest that the providers keep their servers under regular maintenance. And for DOE, we search through the common URI templates in a large-scale URL dataset provided by our industrial partner. The dataset consists of URLs collected from their web crawlers, sandboxes, and some external data feeds. And we find that the number of DOE resolvers is modest compared to that of DOT. In May 2019, we only discovered 17 DOE providers by our method, and most of them have been included in previous lists, like this one maintained by the curl project, and we also find 2 resolvers beyond the list. And more recently, in this July, the number of open DOE resolvers also rises. And we discover over 50 valid URIs, which are operated by 37 providers. And the list also contains several resolvers out of known lists, and we give some examples. Particular,
just to interrupt, the slide is still on DNS-over-TLS resolvers on my screen. I don't know if that should...
Oh, really? I have advanced to...
Is that true of other people, or can other people see a different slide to that?
I'm still on 11 as well.
Same.
Okay.
Still on 11, I have advanced to 15. I don't know what happened. Maybe I should... will I stop share right now and retry it? Help?
That might be a good idea, just to see if that works.
Okay. Is it working?
The slide hasn't come on yet.
Same.
It says double click to enter full screen mode on my screen. Do you want to try again and see if that helps?
Can you see it right now?
Ah, yeah, that's slide 15 now. That's
yeah, slide 15. Okay. So I'll go on from the beginning of slide 15. And so more recently, in this July, the number of open DOE resolvers also rises. And we discover over 50 valid URIs, which are operated by 37 providers. And the list also contains several resolvers out of known lists. And here we give some examples. And in particular, we find from the list that some large ISPs have also started to support DOE. So before I go on, can you see the slide advancing?
Yep, Q2
Okay,
popular service is reachable.
Okay, great. So our second question, we know that clear text DNS queries are manipulated under various policies. So are large public encrypted DNS services reachable by global clients? And are there any issues preventing their access? So in this part, we leverage SOC 5 proxy network platforms that allow large-scale client-side measurements. And to explain, clear text and encrypted DNS queries are issued by our measurement client, passing a super proxy, forwarded to global exit nodes, and eventually reach the target resolvers. And by checking its response at the measurement client, we can tell whether a DNS resolution from the exit node is successful. And to perform the test, we use 2 proxy networks, one global, which is Proxy Rack, and one in China only to see the behaviors of a typical censored network. And in total, we collect 29,000 global vantage points from 166 countries and 85,000 Chinese vantage points. And for each exit node, we first issue clear text DNS, DOT, and DOE queries of our controlled domain to 3 popular DNS services, Cloudflare, Google, and Quad9, to see whether they are successful. And from the nodes which fail the queries, we fetch their TLS certificates, probe common ports, and fetch web pages on the resolver addresses to check whether the failed nodes are actually connecting to the real servers. So here are our test results obtained in 2019. And globally, we find that the reachability of encrypted DNS servers are satisfactory, and the failure rate of encrypted DNS is lower than that of clear text DNS. And we suppose it is because interception policies are currently not considering port 853 or 443. As a result, clients may choose to switch to DOT or DOE when their traditional DNS has problems. However, we found that global clients see more query failures when using Cloudflare DOT, and we find that the address Quad1 can be hijacked in these networks. Actually, this has been an old problem, as devices are found to use this address for purposes like internal communication. And here are some examples. So these ports listed here are not open on the Cloudflare Quad1 address, but from the failed clients when we probe these ports on Quad1, and they are found to be open. So these clients are not able to use Cloudflare DOT because this address is already taken by something else, like network devices. So back to the results, we also notice a high failure rate for Quad9 DOE. And we find that Quad9 forwards its DOE queries to itself on port 53 and sets a small timeout for this operation, which causes unnecessary server failures. And we have reported this issue to Quad9, and they are considering losing the timeout. And another finding is that nearly all clients in China fail to use Google DOE. And yes, it is because of censorship. At the time of experiment, Google DOE was not running on its Anycast address, but on other addresses, which also hosts Google services. But since August 2019, the latest Google DOE domain name, DNS.google, has migrated to Anycast. However, anecdotal evidence shows that it still could be blocked by censorship. Our next question, encryption can bring some performance downgrade. So is the query latency tolerable for encrypted DNS services? We aim to measure the relative query time of clear text and encrypted DNS. And more importantly, we measure their query time when connection is reused as required by the standards. And again, we use ProxyRack to recruit 8,000 global clients for the test. On each client, we issue clear text DNS, DOT, and DOE queries to the popular resolvers and compare their differences in query latency. And because we focus on connection reuse, we only record their DNS transaction time. So our results here show that when connection is reused, the extra query latency of encrypted DNS is tolerable for internet users. Take Cloudflare as an example. When using its encrypted DNS services, our global vantage points see extra query latency on the order of several milliseconds compared to using its clear text DNS. And of course, we also see that for individual clients and vantages in different countries, their performance can fluctuate. But by contrast, if connection is not reused, the extra overhead could be up to hundreds of milliseconds, which shows the importance of connection reuse. And finally, after all these efforts, how are the encrypted DNS protocols now leveraged by internet users? And what does their traffic scale look like? We try to answer this question from passive traffic datasets. Observing DOT traffic is easy because it uses a dedicated port. We can find port 853 traffic to DOT resolver addresses from ISP NetFlow datasets. For DOE, it is again a little bit different. DOE queries are mixed with other HTTPS traffic on port 443. However, recall that DOE resolvers use URI templates, often with a resolver domain name in it, like DNS.google or CloudflareDNS.com. And these domain names need to be resolved before using DOE, and that inspires us to observe the query volume of them in passive DNS datasets to reflect their usage. So to begin with, we acquire 18-month sampled NetFlow dataset from a large Chinese ISP, which is logged by its backbone routers. If a TCP flow is sent over port 853 to a DOT resolver address, we record it as DOT traffic. We find that the traffic scale of DOT is small before 2019, around 2 to 3 orders of magnitude less than traditional DNS over port 53. With that being said, we also notice a growth of DOT traffic over the months. And from clients of this ISP, traffic to Cloudflare DOT rises by over 50% from July 2018 to December 2018. And for DOE, we inspect large passive DNS datasets for the query volume of the resolver domains. Not surprisingly, DOE queries mostly flow to large providers and can rise due to events like experiments from the industry. And also, until very recently, there has been a growing trend on the query volume, which suggests growing usage. Actually, public DNS service providers have a better angle to look into encrypted DNS traffic. And from their data, we can see a more promising growth of usage. For example, Cloudflare reported in 2019 that up to 8% of its DNS queries have been encrypted. And from some of our industrial partners in China, we see similar results. Jihu 360 reports that its DOE service has gained 1 million users so far, which is around 5% of all users of its DNS service. And Ali DNS reports that its DOT and DOE service are now handling 1 billion requests per day, and over 90% of them are DOT queries. So some takeaways and recommendation. For protocol designers, we think one of the reasons that DOT and DOE got strong support is that they are built on well-developed protocols. And for service providers, we recommend that they correct misconfigurations and keep their servers under regular maintenance. For internet users, we believe education is necessary to let them know the benefits of encrypted DNS. And we also publish our scanning results and source code on our project website for public use. And finally, a quick summary on our key observations. First, we discovered thousands of active encrypted DNS resolvers in the wild and a lot of small providers which are less known to public. But their implementations are not always secure. A quarter of them use invalid certificates. And from global clients, large public encrypted DNS services are less interrupted by NPAT policies, and their performance is tolerable with reused connections. And finally, from real-world traffic, we find the usage of encrypted DNS protocols is still less than traditional DNS, but it has been positively growing. So that concludes my talk. Thanks for your time. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you. That was extremely interesting, and particularly so that you've even managed to update the data since ITF at the end of July. So completely up to date, which is marvelous. Okay, well, I think there's a good food for thought in there. If anyone has any questions or comments that you'd like to make, if you're able to raise your virtual hand, that would be most helpful. Other than Roy, who I think is just on his phone, so may not be able to raise his virtual hand. So Roy, just come off mute and chime in when there's a pause. But for everybody else, if you're able just to put your hand up using the Zoom facility, that would be marvelous. And whilst you're thinking, in terms of updating the data set, is that something you're planning to continue to do on a regular basis? Or was it just a one-off to do it for this presentation this time?
Means about the scanning results?
Yes.
Okay, so the scanning results, we actually are planning to regular release updates regularly, but that depends on the status of our machines, actually.
Yeah, fair enough.
We will release some updates if once we have some. Yeah, once we have it.
Brilliant, thank you. Right, I can see Jim, John, and Roy in the queue in that order. So Jim, over to you first.
Thanks very much, Andrew. This is great work, fascinating stuff. I've actually got 3 questions for you, so I apologise for hogging the mic queue like this. The first question is, you talked everyone about failure measurements. How are you defining failure? Are you defining that as the queries don't get answered, or the queries get returned a served fail, or a denied or refused, or you get an answer different to what has been expected because of some kind of filtering? My second question is that you mentioned, sorry, maybe it's better to take them one at a time.
Can I ask one by one so I can remember everything?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so you mentioned that the failed queries that we mentioned in our measurement. So the failure only includes timeouts and timeouts and other issues that preventing our clients from receiving a valid response. It does not include server. It also includes server fail.
Right, but you know, are you measuring refused errors? Say because the resolver is refusing to answer the query because for policy reasons or whatever else?
Yes.
Or if you don't answer back because the resolver's telling lies, say, don't go here, go there.
Excuse me, I didn't follow that.
The second example would be is when the resolving server is giving you a different answer, say to, instead of getting to somewhere that the resolver operator doesn't want you to go to, it points you, say, a landing page for something else.
Okay, so you're talking about if the resolvers are returning a false answer.
Yes.
We also checked that because we query our control domain, so we have control of the authoritative name server, and we compared the answer given by our authoritative name server with the response that we get. We find normally there has not been false answers, but there has been false answers due to reasons like access control, because we're not affiliated with the resolver, and when we probe it, it returns some fixed address.
Yeah, that's good, thanks. It may be better at some point in the future to try and differentiate between these different types of failure modes rather than just attribute it to some kind of transport level error or something of that nature. Just a suggestion for the future.
Okay, thank you.
Second question, I think at that point I'll shut up after the second one, which is you mentioned you were getting or you're observing of the order of billions of dot queries coming from inside China. Have you any indication as to what's generating that traffic or what end applications are actually using dot?
Yes, you mean the validity of the port 853 traffic if it's really dot?
No. You're saying you're getting billions of queries to port 853. I'm just trying to figure out if you have any way of knowing who's generating that traffic. Is it a specific application, or is it some kind of large-scale dot, say, by an operator inside China for whatever reason?
You mean in our passive traffic dataset?
Yes.
We observe some dots of a port 853 TCP flow.
Yeah, but who's generating that? If you're getting lots of dot traffic, where's it coming from?
Yes.
Do you know what applications are generating it?
We're currently not very sure what applications generated them, but in our paper, we did look into the source addresses where they are coming from. and they are coming from some residential ISPs, so we're not very sure whether, we're not very sure about the exact applications that are generating them. But on the other hand, we also find some temporary users, a lot of them in early 2019, which is active for only less than 1 week. So we are not very sure if they're just trying out DOT or some other reasons.
Okay, thank you very much. Very, very helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. John Todd is on next, and for Chao's information, John is from Quad 9, so I'm sure we've most interested with some of the data. John?
Hi. Yeah, I'll repeat again, this is very interesting and useful information.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask a little bit about some of the first slides, or first part of the research that you did, about discovering the number of open DOT or DOH resolvers.
Okay.
Did you make any guesses or perform any research to discover if the open resolver addresses were intentional or unintentional? In other words, did you see what did you see in the certificates as far as, were there IP addresses in the certificates themselves, or were there names, and did the names match the forwards? The reason I ask is because it seems that you had a very large, an unexpectedly large number of open resolvers discovered, when I would expect most of the open resolvers that you identified, certainly the ones you identified by name as far as the organization goes, they are actually operating on Anycast addresses, which are a small number of address spaces. And what you are in fact discovering is the back-end management interfaces of some of those systems. I could be wrong, but that would be my guess, because if I look at our own network, that's how we operate. But we intentionally block connections to the management interfaces of those Anycast nodes, and we only answer on the Anycast prefix. And so by looking at the certificate, were you able to determine if these were intentional or unintentional leakages or open ports on DOT or DOH?
Actually, we have the same guess, because among the several thousand DOT addresses that we discover, a lot of them belong to large companies like Cloudflare, because they're the common names of their certificate says cloudflaredns.com, but they are actually not advertised on their websites. So they could be back-end resolvers that are open to public, but we're not sure if this is intentional or just a mistake. I'm not sure if it can be called a mistake. And then there is a small part which we have identified that are personal, are set up by individual persons, and they commonly use self-signed certificates. We can see from their common names and their certificate status, they often use invalid certificates. Okay. But I'm not sure if we can say or determine if they are intentional solely based on the certificates, I assume.
You might be able to take a guess. If there's no name that resolves to that IP address as part of the forward, and the IP address itself is not part of the cert, then it would be difficult or impossible for someone to use that IP address as a destination easily. So you might interpret that as a mistake, but it's difficult to understand that without having a full view of the DNS and the client's transaction. But I think there might be ways to do it, but very interesting. I'm interested to see the expansion of both of those services, intentionally or unintentionally.
Yes, sure.
Okay, thanks, John. Now, Roy momentarily raised his hand. So was that a question, Roy, or Did you sort of take it down on, and didn't have a question?
I'm good. Thanks, Andrew.
Okay, that's grand. In which case, Zaid, you're up next.
Yeah, thanks. I just have, on the slide where you showed performance of GOH and DOT
Yes.
domestically in China and then abroad. There was, in the TLS section or column, when referring to China, there was a dash. What is that?
Is it possible?
Oh, you mean
slide perhaps?
Oh, you mean I think you're mentioning this one. I think you're mentioning this one.
Yes.
This one here?
Yeah, what is that?
This one is because at the time of our experiment, Google Dot was not officially launched, so we did not perform the test.
Oh, I see. Okay, so this was not performed. Okay, great. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you. Right. Any last comments? Or, well, yeah, I see Alistair's got one. Come in, Alistair. Might want to come off mute first. Let me unmute you.
Ah, that's better. Did you, during the experiment, capture anything to do with the TLS layer sort of session lengths and things like that? Because I know there's quite wide variability in the settings.
Session links, you're referring to?
I'm sorry, the TLS session reuse and things like that. Whether they're handing out tickets, whether they're handing out just standard.
You mean in the traffic? In the traffic?
In the connection, when you made the connection, the sort of how long were those? Did you capture how long the session reuse periods are and things like that for the variety of services you found? Because the variety would be quite. I'm curious as how much variability there is in people's default configs.
Okay, I think this is a little bit irrelevant to our measurement items, but I think that common implementations we know, such as Cloudflare and GetDNS, they have a default timeout of tens of seconds.
If it helps, I think when BT did some testing about TLS session lengths, and I think none of the BT team are on the call at the moment, so I apologize in advance when they hear this recording if I get this wrong. I think they actually found variability from 3,600 seconds for some resolvers up to 7 days, I think was the longest session length, which I think was for Cloudflare actually. But we might have to retrospectively correct that if I've misremembered.
I think you're right, Andrew.
Thank goodness. Oh, sorry, Dave. Apologies. I didn't see you were there. Yeah, so if that's of interest, Jay, I'm sure we could share their methodology with you offline if that's something that is of use to you.
Excuse me.
So if you have an interest in session length, as I say, the team grupBT Group did do some testing on that, I think about a year or so ago, using curl scripts, if I remember rightly. So if you ever wanted to extend your test methodology, there might be an easy way of doing that.
Okay.
Yeah, if I could speak up, I think some of the results were published from an EDDI meeting that was, if I remember right, I think it was the one back in December of 2019. So if you go to the EDDI GitHub repository, you can pull up the presentation there that BT did. Some very good analysis.
Yeah.
That was Glenn Dean, by the way. I help run the EDDI. So.
Okay, thank you.
And Glenn, you had, I think that was Alistair's question. So Glenn, you also had your hand up. Did you have a question?
I did have a question. So, you know, I noticed you measured some very large service providers that are global operations. But as DOE is starting to become deployed, there was a lot of other operators, including Comcast, whose DOE resolvers are currently publicly accessible, which is, of course, a change in policy from traditional DOE not traditional DOE, traditional DNS-53. Have you considered including those in your measurements as well to see what that would turn up when you examine them in the same way?
We may leave it for future work because at the time of experiments, these are the most popular ones, and the other ones are not launched yet. So we didn't include them in our tests.
Okay. Well, if you do want to include them, I think there's a number of operators who currently, it's not a commitment to keep them open long-term because that's not the business they're in. But there's a number of operators that for the purposes of allowing people to do testing and debugging have opened up the things. I like I say, Comcast, who I work for, has opened them up at the moment. Again, it's not a commitment that will stay open. I think BTs are open as well. Maybe if BT's on the line on the call, they can also comment. I think another sets of other operators as well at the moment enabled their stuff to be accessible by anywhere on the internet.
Yeah, I think
future thought.
I think Deutsche Telekom's is also open, and I believe is AT&T's open as well. Any of the AT&T team, or have I?
I think so, because I think we find AT&T DOE in our discovery this July.
Marvelous. Fantastic. Right, thank you, Glenn. Has anyone else got any last question or comment to make? I'll take that as not. In which case, thank you. That's an excellent presentation. I think you've certainly given us food for thought, particularly those of us involved in the ADD working group on discovery of resolvers. That's most helpful. So good to have some actual quantitative data to also bear in mind in those discussions. So thanks very much for taking the time, particularly as it's now nearly midnight your time locally. So I think that's real dedication to come on and share that knowledge with us. So thank you.
Thank you.
And you're welcome to stay onto the call or disappear if you actually want to go to sleep, by the way, Jeez. Up to you either way.
Okay, I'll stay for a few minutes.
Fantastic. And you might want to take your screen share off. Just
okay, sure.
Brilliant. Thank you. Right. So that brings us on to any other business then, everyone. So we've finished the main sort of focus of the sort of discussion for this week. I've got one item to raise in a moment, but does Glenn, is that your raised hand from last time, or do you have some AOB you would like to raise?
That's a new raised hand because I have new AOB. It may be the same AOB you were going to bring up. I don't know. I wanted to briefly put a plug in for the ADD working group that is going to have its second interim session tomorrow at 1300 GMT. And the information for it, if you want to join, if you don't already know, is available on the ADD working group page in the IETF data tracker. And you can find under meeting section there, the link to the WebEx and the other materials. The focus of this meeting will be largely around encryption. If you're on the mail list, I put a question on Friday, and it may have vanished in people's early weekend mail, asking from the chair's perspective if participants, authentication is a very broad topic. And so to help the chairs understand what specific authentication topics we need to discuss, I asked for people to respond with any sub topics under authentication that specifically they wanted to address during the interim. And I would very much appreciate it. We've had a couple of responses. It would be nice to have some more responses from people because I know this is a big topic for a lot of people. And what does authentication mean when you throw it out there, and where people should be using it, and how people should be using it, and when it's required. So I know there's a passion out there. We just haven't had a lot of responses. And the meeting is tomorrow. So I will be watching the list all day today. So please respond. That's my hand, Andrew.
Fantastic. And to that end, I've put a link in the chat, which will take you to the meeting agenda and I think WebEx details, if anyone doesn't have those immediately to hand. And yes, please join. It was a good call last week, in my humble opinion. Right, before I raise my brief AOB, does anybody else have any other business you wanted to raise whilst we're gathered together? I'll take that as a no, in which case I'll just flag, I sent out earlier on this afternoon, European time, some information in terms of sort of latest news this week. The main thing to highlight was ECHO, the industry group based in Germany, but with a much broader sort of membership than just sort of German companies, put out last week a discussion paper on DOE. So you'll see in the weekly headlines, I put a link to their press release, as well as a link from which you can register to download the, I think it's about a 24-page PDF discussion paper, which had contributions from a range of parties, including Open Exchange, as both Stuart and Vittorio are on the call, as well as Cloudflare, and I think a few others as well. Looking at some of the actual practical implementation issues associated with DOE. So I'd urge you, if you have an opportunity, to take a look at that. It's a good read and does raise some technical and policy issues. So there's something in there for everyone, and definitely a worthwhile document to read. The reason I mention that, apart from because it's worthwhile, is Lars and Klaus from ECHO will be joining this call this time next week to reprise their paper and then take questions. So please read it in advance, and then you can ask them some questions, but based on the issues as you see them from the paper. So that's it from me. Right, so last chance for any other business from anyone. Otherwise, have a fabulous week. Don't forget the ADD working group tomorrow and the homework that the co-chairs have asked people to do in advance, and do take a look on GitHub as well and the issues list for that before the call if you can. And other than that, no doubt we'll speak again through the week or this time next week if not. Have a great week, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.